Hello again from my front porch. You may notice the lighting is a little weird from what it normally is. That's because I'm doing this one here tonight. It's about 9 o'clock at night and it's a little too dusky outside. The sun has gone set enough that if I were to try to film this one without that, without the lights up here on, you would just see shadows, you'd just see darkness, and you wouldn't see me, which actually might make it an enjoyable episode. But seriously, I am chuckling where I can chuckle because there are times where it's hard to find reasons to smile and reasons to laugh, and this is one of them. The reason that I felt the need to do this episode here right now at 9 o'clock on Sunday night here in Des Moines, Iowa, is because tonight they have instigated curfew here in Des Moines. The entire county is under curfew, Polk County. And now remember, Des Moines, Iowa is the state capital. So that means the entire county that the state capital is in is now under quarantine, effective as of right now until 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. That's serious stuff. That's because it's not just in knee-jerk reaction to what we're seeing around the country. It's because the rioting and the damage and the destruction, the harm and injury to people has found its way here to Des Moines, Iowa. I don't know how much of it is because of people in Des Moines that are doing it, or if we're seeing here the same thing that's being reported pretty much everywhere else, that peaceful protesters go out to raise their voice, and then they do their protest, but as they wrap up and a lot of the peaceful people begin to leave, there will be this other group of people who incite the violence, who incite the destruction. And sadly enough, while most of the peaceful protesters leave, there are still some of those protesters who are there may not be quite so peaceful. And in fact, I keep hearing, I keep seeing and hearing online that that there are other entities, other individuals who are showing up and trying to stir up the trouble and make the protesters look bad by instigating these things. And I believe it's true. Now there's a debate as to is it the right wing or the left wing, and I've talked about that in the last episode. But the real important thing to remember is it doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter what they represent. What matters is they wouldn't be successful if it wasn't for the fact that there are people here locally who follow their lead. When they show up and they start doing things, yeah, there are a lot of folks who say, stop that, you need to stop doing that, don't do that. And in fact, we see that in Minneapolis. There's video of people smashing windows and trying to cause destruction or even beating people up, and you hear others in the crowd urging them to stop. You need to stop doing that. Not that anybody actually steps in and tries to stop. That's another frustrating aspect for me. But even on that point, there are examples that I'm seeing online of folks who will make human barriers to protect people, businesses, police officers, and that's refreshing to see. That's good to see that that in the midst of the chaos, there are individuals who rise to the finest heights of humanity rather than everybody just sinking to the lowest depths. And we've seen that even here in Des Moines. Last night there were riots. I'm not going to call them protesting. I fully support riots. I do not. And when you start just destroying property and looting and vandalizing, and I don't care how you try to couch it, how you try to dress it up and say, well, it's a protest so we can hear our voice. I don't honestly, personally, I don't care. When you feel that you have the ability and the right to inflict that kind of suffering on somebody else because you claim you are protesting against the suffering of others, or whatever the case may be, that's hypocrisy. An eye for an eye. That's never a good policy. Come on. I mean, how many times have we actually seen that work? And in fact, many of the same people who right now are justifying the protests going on that result in the destruction that evolved into that, and then and all the mayhem that comes out of that. The apologists for that oftentimes are the same people who will tell you that we should not be spending so much money on military, because what's the point of military if all we're going to do is escalate an arms race and nobody wins, and war is never a deterrent? Well, now wait a minute. Why would war not be a deterrent? Well, because the violence just begets violence, and then you try to outdo each other and there's no solution. Okay, but why doesn't that same thing apply when we're talking about riots? I did my Sundays with Paul episode today, and I'm not going to rehash that whole thing here, because I want you to just go watch that one. But I struggled with that. I had an idea in mind for what I was going to do for the episode that I did today, but it just didn't seem appropriate. It didn't seem to fit with everything that's currently going on. And so I thought I really need to do something that responds to this, that reflects this, and addresses this. And I had trouble with that, because whenever I would put my head in that space, it would always go negative. I would get caught up in all of the pessimism and the nastiness that's going on. And I didn't obviously want to do a Sundays with Paul that was that tone to it. Finally, though, I had an epiphany, or divine inspiration is probably the better way to say it. And it occurred to me that I just needed to go to the basics. And the basics being the verses of John 3:16 and 17. And the reason for that being, John 3:16, everybody knows, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. That's a standard staple. Even people who don't go to church much, you're familiar with that verse. But it's that next verse, John 3:17, that really struck a chord with me, because in that verse it says, "For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that through him the world would be saved." Now, the reason that stuck out to me was because it really drove home the point that, see, now God could see the good in humanity and the bad. And even though he could see the bad, he still gave his Son as a sacrifice so that everybody could be saved. Not just the good ones, not just the ones that he likes, but everybody, the whole world would have that opportunity. And the reason that struck me is because I realized that so much of what we have going on right now is because people have stopped seeing other people. We only see groups. We see the police. We see the white people. We see the black people. We see whatever groupings you want to break it down into. We see the Trumpsters, whatever, and all these wild assumptions that are made, most of the time completely erroneously. But we pigeonhole people. I did an episode on that a couple of years ago, I think, about how much I hate pigeonholing, and now we're seeing it on an exponentially large scale, and how destructive it is. Because if we would stop and just acknowledge people, if we would see the person that we're talking to, or the individual we are talking about, rather than trying to define everybody by a group label that we have foolishly tried to define, a lot of the problems that we are having right now wouldn't even exist. And here's a case in point. I saw an excellent video that really touched my heart. And I'm not exaggerating. I mean, I cried a little when I was watching it. It stirred up some beautiful emotions inside of me. And that was a video of the sheriff of the county that Flint, Michigan is in. And I'm not going to try to pronounce, I saw it spelled out, and I'm not going to try to say it because I'm sure I will get it wrong. but it's the county that Flint, Michigan is in, and he showed up to talk to his deputies. They're all there in riot gear. They've got the clubs, they've got the masks, and they're wearing the body armor, all the whole 9 yards. But this sheriff, he's got all these protesters that are there, and this sheriff, he shows up and he gets rid of his baton, gets rid of his weapons, takes off his helmet, exposing himself to them, to his face, his head, and he starts not to lecture them, he starts to talk to them as if they're actually human beings. Can you imagine? And he does this. He engages with them, and he tries to impress upon them that he and the other officers are there to support them. That they are there to make sure their protest can happen without issue, without difficulty. They're not there to cause trouble for the protesters. They're not there to prevent the protesting, and they are there to look out for the protesters to make sure that the protesting, that their voices can be heard and not muffled by violence and other issues. And the crowd kind of half-heartedly responds. And then the sheriff says the best thing ever. He says, "What can I do to prove to you, to show you that I'm with you, that we're with you?" And somebody in the crowd yells out, "March with us!" And then a whole bunch of other people start chanting it, "March with us, march with us." And he says, all right, let's do this. Let's walk, let's go. And he steps into the crowd and he just starts walking, and the whole group, in fact, he says, let's turn this protest into a parade. And they cheer and they cheer. And he starts walking, and the people who in this group are there to protest, and they're there to protest police brutality to a large extent. Here's the sheriff of their county still wearing his gear that all says sheriff and everything on it, and he's walking amongst them. They're cheering, they're laughing, people are giving him a high five, shaking his hand, people have their phones out, they're live streaming and videoing, and you hear them talking about, "We're here walking and the sheriff is right with us, can you believe this man?" And there's all these pictures of him walking along with him down the road, and people high-fiving and people waving him out, hugging people and stuff. And I watched that and I'm like, why is that so difficult? Why do we make it so difficult? Here is a guy who did not go out there as sheriff to see a group of protesters that he and his personnel needed to guard against, but he saw people who are hurting, people who are angry, people who are frustrated. And instead of dismissing them, instead of telling them, just be quiet and be good, instead of that, he endorsed what they were trying to say. He supported. In fact, in the video, the video I saw kind of picks up late in the game. But from the first things you hear him say, I think you can easily infer that he has expressed to them that he is just as upset about what happened in Minneapolis to George Floyd. That he doesn't agree with that, and that kind of conduct should not be taken as representative of the fine men and women who wear the uniform and take it seriously and don't inflict that kind of thing. And he's absolutely right. But if he had just said that and said, "Now disperse and go home," that would have meant nothing. But he walked with them. He acknowledged them. He recognized them as the people they are, as the individuals that they are. And that was so powerful. And so seeing things like that now online, and then really thinking through the biblical example of John 3:17, that God, recognizing the good and the bad in us, still gave us the greatest gift ever. It's just like, okay, what? That's what we need to strive for. That's who we need to be. And now tonight, nobody in Polk County, Iowa is able to be out and about now until 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. Well, except for the people on, I assume, Interstate 8035, because they're going through, they don't know there's a curfew. So I'm sure there's still traffic going there. But everything's closed, and if you're seen out on the streets walking around and driving around, you're going to be in trouble. So that's the lockdown tonight. It's a more stringent lockdown than we had at any point during the COVID virus thing, which it's a whole another matter. Have you noticed that nobody says any cautions about the rioters needing to keep 6 feet apart, make sure you're wearing your face masks and all that kind of stuff? Nobody says any of that. And so it'll be really interesting to see if we have a spike in COVID cases or not after all of this. After all this hysteria about we need to keep distance and we need to do stuff, now we got these big literal mobs of people, and if there's no COVID virus stuff that gets spread rampantly because of this, that's kind of really calls into question some of the other instructions we've had. But point being, at least here in Iowa, this lockdown that we have tonight, and we may have it other nights, who knows? This lockdown tonight, this is serious business, and it's actually more serious than the lockdown, than what our issues were when we were just only battling the COVID virus. And so this is a good time for everybody that may be watching this here in Polk County. It's a good time for each of us to sit back and reflect on, how do we treat other people? Do we, in fact, treat them like people? Do we pass judgment on others because of the group we assume they are part of? Do we presume what their character is, what their intelligence is, what their opinions are, what their attitude is? Do we make all these assumptions about them because of the group that we believe they should be pigeonholed to? Or do we actually stop and see the person, the individual, and recognize that every single one of us is different, every single one of us is unique, every single one of us is special, and every single one of us ultimately wants the same thing: to simply be able to live a good, peaceful, and productive life. We should be linking arms. We should all be walking together on the same path. The fact that we are not is not shame on the president. It's not shame on the Congress. It's not shame on the police. It's not shame on the media. It's shame on us. With that, I'm going to go hunker down for my night of curfew. And I'll see y'all next time from my front porch.